So it's about midday here on the farm. I got out here pretty early. It was before the sun came up, which, I don't know, isn't that early these days. Got out, moved the cattle around, fed the birds, moved the chickens, fed the chickens, kind of did all the basics of my farm chores of the morning, fed the pigs, because as I'm recording this, the pigs are still here, even though the pigs won't be here very, very soon. And yeah, I just, kind of went through my morning and then actually had to leave the farm around 9:30 or so. And it took Toby Dog to go to the vet. It's time for his annual checkup, which the good news there is he is doing really, really well. He is perfectly healthy. His coat looks good. His weight looks good. His, recovery from Lyme disease seems great. He got some updates on his vaccines, all the standard maintenance and health stuff you're supposed to do for your livestock guardian dog. I will say, though, when I took Toby away, Abby was a little bit upset. She felt left out. When it comes to the two dogs, Toby Dog is always very, very reluctant to leave the farm. He never wants to go anywhere. He wants to stay within this space of the farm. He likes it when I let him out of the gate and outside of the bird yard, and he will go just around the perimeter and pee everywhere he possibly can and sniff around and just really try to claim the territory as his own, because it is. And that's what his job is. I mean, so much of what a livestock guardian dog does is that combination of marking and barking. So they're marking their territory and then they're barking at anything that comes near it. And that's how an effective livestock guardian dog works. And for Toby Dog, he doesn't like to leave the farm and he wants to stay on his territory and he wants to look over his farm. And I totally get that. And I don't know. It's very much like me personally. I like to do the things that I do. I like to do them in a certain way. I like to do them in a way that, I find comfortable, and that will be just how I do it. I don't like to go many places. I'm very happy mostly just staying here on the farm, having my routines and, essentially marking and barking. I think the barking comes in the form of, making videos and such for me. Not so much to keep people away. It's just, I don't know, that's how I communicate. Just like how Toby Dog uses his bark to communicate. Abby Dog, though, she is a bit different. She likes to go places. Anytime I ever offer her to take her anywhere, in the truck, she just happily jumps up. I mean, Toby Dog, it is a real struggle to encourage him to get into the truck, and most of the time I still have to pick up his 100-pound body and put him in there. But for Abby Dog, oh, golly, she will go anywhere I want to go. She just wants to be out and about doing things and be with me. That's her energy. And the two dogs are just so different when it comes to their respective energies. And I think for a while, it actually took me a good deal of time to realize that their energy was so different and their needs were so different. And it was a struggle for me because, and I've said this in videos before, but I got really lucky when it came to Toby Dog in terms of he was like an out-of-the-box livestock guardian dog. He was ready to roll. He came to the farm at about, 3.5 months old. Actually, almost 4 months old. And as soon as he got here, I had to do a little bit of training with him. I had to do the basics of come, sit, and stay, which he even doesn't do all that well these days because he's an independent-minded dog. But, I had to do those basics, and it was easy. And, I think I scolded him a couple of times for trying to chase ducks or play with birds. And after that, just like it happens in the novel I wrote about him, Toby Dog of Goldshaw Farm, he pretty much figured out his job, and he was, by the time he was 6-7 months old, he was working as pretty much a full-fledged livestock guardian dog. And for folks who are familiar with our YouTube channel, you'll know Abby Dog was not nearly that easy. Abby Dog had some complexities. Abby Dog, she came to the farm a little bit older than Toby, by about a month and a half maybe. She came from a very different setting, and I won't even get into that one, and I'll just leave it at that. And from day one, she was high energy, high engagement. She was like very easy to train, like on the basics of dog behavior of come, sit, stay, leave it, like all that. She picked up those commands quicker than Toby, and she was easier to train than Toby. She was more food and praise motivated than Toby. Like, she was just super easy. But the natural instincts of the livestock guardian dog, she struggled. And so that was something that I found to be difficult, because I was consistently trying to fit her into the framework I developed in my mind with Toby, and I wasn't making the adaptations I needed to really make her successful and make her, really fit in and work here on our farm. Abby dog, come! I don't know if you can actually see this in the video, but both dogs are hanging out with me here in the hoop coop. It's a little bit windy today, and so I was going to record this outside, but I think it made more sense to record inside, which means, and by inside I mean inside here, not inside the house. Pretty soon I'm going to have to start recording all of these podcasts inside the house, because, for me to get comfortable and set up and just want to sit and talk to you guys for a period of time, it's so much harder to do that just out on the farm in, say, December or January. And so you'll see this podcast recording places start to shift a little bit more as the winter gets colder. But right now, it's actually quite pleasant sitting here in the hoop coop. I got the sun beaming down. I got both dogs hanging out. I don't know, you guys might even be able to see in the background that there's some other animals that are now in the hoop coop. We have started to transition into winter mode, which you'll see in the videos in a couple of weeks. One thing to note, like a lot of our videos are, they're produced, it takes me and, Valerie, who does a lot of my editing, like it takes us, we're usually about a 2-week behind, like, 10 to 14 days behind real life. And that just gives us time to edit. It gives me time to, think about the story and structure things a little bit. And it just is a lot less stressful. Like when I first started making videos, I was like, shooting it, editing it, and immediately putting it up, and then just having to rush to do the next one. And that became really stressful. What you doing there, pup? You want to say hi? Yeah, Abby's saying hi. But I digress. And so, yes, we're doing this in here, and I've got both dogs hanging out. And it's funny because you can see Abby here. She's trying to get my attention and hang out with me. Toby dog is peacefully napping in the background, and he's just a happy pup. As I was driving back with him from the vet, I decided to stop off at the gas station real quick just to, get actually gas for the tractor, as well as, pick up a couple of odds and ends groceries, because it's like this grocery store that's right by the vet. It's like, it's part grocery store, part gas station, and it's the closest place to buy supplies on the regular, or one of the closest places to buy supplies from the farm. And so, just while I was there, picked up a couple things and had Toby dog just wait in the car. And gosh, he just perfectly sits there. And that's something I would never do with Abby, because the chaos that would ensue if I just left her in the truck would be immeasurable. So it strikes me where the good parts of Toby, make him great for certain things, but they also make him really bad for certain things. Like, the fact that Abby is the one who goes up and does the cattle chores with me, and Abby's the one who I can, use to actually help me move animals. Like when I was, migrating the ducks and geese actually down to this part of the farm. Oh, Toby, don't get offended, buddy. Come here. You get love too. But when I was migrating them down, actually Abby was a huge help in just helping make sure none of the birds strayed away as I was herding them. And so that's something that Toby dog has never taken to and is not good at. And I guess that gets to why I wanted to sit down and record this podcast today, because, I get a lot of comments from viewers when it comes to our dogs. I think they're a big part of a lot of the videos I make. They're a big part of our farm. They're some of my closest companions for sure. But I get a lot of comments from some folks who say that I always treat Toby really, really well, and I'm always really negative and down on Abby. Or I also get comments from folks who will say over and over again that I am constantly ignoring Toby in favor of Abby, and he's such a good dog and he's constantly getting let out. And quite honestly, the truth of the matter is they're both good dogs. They're just different dogs, and they're different in different ways, and they require different things in terms of care. They require different things in terms of training, in terms of my attention, in terms of affection, in terms of what jobs they're good at and what jobs they're not good at. And I've really let that guide. And so if someone were to ask me which dog do I love better, the answer is I love them the same, which I know is probably what a lot of parents are forced to say about their kids. And then everybody says, oh no, but you do have a favorite somewhere somehow. And the reality is I just love them in different ways, but, love both of them with all my heart. I mean, just Toby Dog right here as he's sitting here. He's just so calm and serene and gentle and just such a good pup that, I couldn't imagine my life without him. And while Abby has given me so many headaches and heartaches and stress and forced me to completely rethink my philosophy when it comes to training dogs, the journey that we've gone on together is such an incredible one. And, I'm so glad to have gone on it with her, and I'm so glad to have her in my life. Toby's got some comments for you. Which, again, is just really, I think, an important lesson and something to think about for you guys, because and I think that idea that you can treat them fairly by treating them differently is something that we struggle with a lot in life in general and society and in a lot of places. Where, I guess it gets into that premise of the difference between equity and equality, where equality means everybody's being kind of treated exactly the same versus equity being everybody's treated fairly. And you sometimes have to take into account like the circumstances that somebody's coming from or coming into and kind of how that works for them and how that might be different from one person to another. And, not wanting to make this a whole wrap on that topic, but I think that that's something that, folks who, see accommodations and aren't getting those same accommodations get upset over because they feel like it's unfair to them. And I guess to not want to get into a whole podcast episode on that topic, I raise this just because I think it's an important test that we need to put to ourselves when we're thinking about ourselves, not just the ones we love. I think particularly for folks who have dreams and have goals and have internal motivation and are pushing themselves towards something, whether they dream of someday moving out to a farm or a homestead of their own and raising their own food and having their own animals. And they're kind of working to build up skills as well as build up the financial resources to be able to pull a move off like that. I think, you can fall into this trap, and I know I fell into this trap, right? Of looking at other people and seeing what they do and saying, hey, I gotta, do what they did. And that's like the path and that's the way to go. And meanwhile, the path that might be best suited for you and be most equitable for you and the smartest play for you might look very different than that person that gave you that motivation and inspiration. And I'm not going to name names because I don't want this to turn into something controversial, or I don't want to make this the focus of this podcast either, accidentally. And I'm finding more and more I've got to carefully choose my words when I talk about topics like this and talk about other folks and other farmers and that sort of thing. But there was a farmer who was very, very inspirational to me when I was still just an office dude dreaming of being on a farm and starting a farm. I looked at his operation and saw what he did and said, gosh, that's how it needs to be done. And gosh, I would love to do that one day myself. And gosh, I'd love to be like him. And it was a real motivation and inspiration for me. And in the earliest days, I was trying to mimic my approach and, think about how to get there, and to be doing exactly what he did, just basically take his farm and transport it to New England. And that's how I'd be doing it. But I think at the time, because I was so inspired, I was also blind to the advantages that he had as well as the circumstances that he had, and how those things were the things that guided him to the place where he ultimately ended up. For example, he grew up on his farm, or at least, kind of eventually grew up on a farm, and, was on the family farm, and eventually, after going to school, came back to take over the family farm. And, you know, that's great for him, and that's a great story, and he kind of figured out how to evolve from, say, his father's method of farming to something more contemporary that I think has served as a template for a lot of folks today in terms of how they think about farming, and particularly regenerative farming. And so I was really inspired by that, and saw that, and saw kind of the output and the end product, and was like, oh, I got to do that, and I guess I got to just do those things. But there was always this nagging thing behind me saying, well, must be nice, though, to be able to inherit a farm. Must be nice to be able to have, kind of a father who taught you some of the basics. Must be nice to be doing that since you were, a kid working around animals and such. And it must be nice to have like all of those advantages. And so it was part of my struggle early on. As my wife and I kind of like looked at our circumstances and our situation, we still said, hey, we want to go live the farm life and figure out a way to make this work. And part of what actually enabled us to do that and allowed us to do that was taking stock in kind of our advantages and figure out how is our circumstance and situation going to help us move to the place that we wanted to move to in life, and sort of what things would we need to do to kind of make that at the core of our approach. And so that inventory that we did was actually pretty simple and straightforward, where, we looked at, the fact that, look, I had a very good job. I was making, kind of six-figure income. We were saving. We did not live an extravagant life. I mean, we lived in like expensive places, but even when we were living in expensive places, we weren't like, I don't know, going crazy. We weren't going out every night. We were, trying to be frugal, like didn't buy expensive luxury automobiles or ridiculousness like that. And so we had that as an advantage. And so we had like really, really healthy savings, both, kind of on the retirement side, but also, kind of on the just general investment side of things as well. And so we had financial resources that a lot of other folks didn't have. And so kind of that was one advantage. We had the advantage of the fact that we didn't have kids. If you think about the responsibilities and kind of commitment you make when you have children and you're raising children, those, are things that you have to plan for and think about. And you can't just necessarily be as capricious as if you are a married couple with two incomes and no kids. Like, you don't have the resources. You don't have the same flexibility that, folks like Allison and I had. And so, that was an advantage we had. So we didn't grow up on a farm. We didn't have a farm to inherit, but we had the financial resources where if we said, hey, we found the right property, we could probably figure out a way to buy it and even buy it without debt. And that's essentially what we did. We kind of looked around, scoured the market for what I was always calling kind of it wasn't diamond in the rough. What was the expression I was using? I'm drawing a blank on it, but like essentially diamonds in the rough, where it was like something. Oh, it was undervaluations, because remember, I was working in the investment community at the time, and so undervalued opportunities was how I was always kind of pitching it to real estate agents that I talked to. Which, gosh, man, if I look back on that and think about myself, I'm just like, would love to, slap myself up at the side of the head and it's like, you sounded so horrible saying that sort of stuff. You don't even know it. But that's what I was doing. And so, we eventually actually stumbled on this farm, and this farm back in 2016 was on the market for, I think it was like $350,000. It had been on the market for like 6+ years. The price had been dropping over and over again. It had the upside of a whole lot of land, and kind of a nice old farmhouse that needed some work, but wasn't like a complete, like, tear down. Like, it just, needed to put some work in and updates. And so those were the upsides to it. And it was at a relatively reasonable price. And particularly if you were, people coming from, real estate markets like New York City and Washington, D.C., And now coming out here, you're like, wait a minute, that's not just like how much you need for a down payment. Like that's the whole cost. Okay. Like it just, the equation becomes very different for you. And so that was one aspect of it. And then I think the other part though was there were downsides to it. The farm was in the absolute middle of nowhere. I mean, let's see, we are about 3.5 hours to Boston, about 3.5, maybe almost 4 by the time you cross the border into Montreal. We're about an hour and 45 minutes to Burlington. We are about a little less than an hour to Montpelier. Like there's just no large towns or large industries really nearby, and so like finding good regular work is much more challenging for sure. So that's one disadvantage. And this was again 2016, pre-COVID, pre everybody working from home and finding kind of that magical flexibility. And so that disadvantage was something that we had to work within. The other part though with it was that oh, something's got the dog's attention. I think it might be the UPS guy. I won't get distracted. The other part was the barn was in very, very rough shape, and I mean still not in great shape, but like is this gigantic barn that was at the time attached to the house, and everybody saw that as a major financial liability, and it kind of was. I mean, in fact, we actually got homeowners insurance after we purchased the place, but we got dropped pretty quickly on after they did an inspection and they saw the condition of the barn and kind of saw the fact that the house and the barn were actually connected buildings at the time when we first took over the place, that like it was the same structure. And so the condition of the house was considered the condition of the barn. And so they said, oh yeah, we can't insure you. So like that was a challenge. There's another challenge in the fact that our land, so all 160 plus acres of it, not all, but most of the 160 plus acres is actually conserved in the Vermont Land Trust. And what that means is, so the Vermont Land Trust is this organization that tries to preserve and protect forest and farmland in Vermont. And back in the 1970s, the folks who owned the farm, I guess in the 1970s into like, I don't know, it was like maybe in the 80s that I think they bought it in the mid 70s. They owned it through the 80s and into the 90s, and I think sold it like in 2000 or so to the folks that we bought it from. Well, those folks actually, not the folks we bought it from, the folks right before, they actually were the ones who set up the easement, the conservation easement. And so what that means effectively is, on the downside, this land can actually never be broken up. So I can't start selling parcels of land. Like it always has to remain its contiguous 160 plus acres. And I can't like build structures willy-nilly. I have to get approval. Like even, for example, like when we built this greenhouse, like I had to get approval for the greenhouse from Vermont Land Trust to do it, which, you know, is fine because they're in the business of helping, you know, landowners and farmers preserve, you know, forest and farmland. And so, you know, if I wanted to have built like, say, a swimming pool and a pool cabana and like something like that, I think I would have actually had problems and they would have probably declined that request. But since I was like, I need to build a greenhouse to house birds and grow pumpkins and other things, and they were like, oh yeah, that's totally cool. And so that's, you know, kind of something I had to do. And, you know, it has that disadvantage of, you know, can't break it up, and it has to be used for agriculture or farmland, pretty much most of the land. There's like 2 acres right around the house and the barn that's excluded from that, but everything else is within that land trust. And so because of that, that scares off a lot of folks who'd potentially consider purchasing a property like this. You know, everybody, when you see our property, right, the house is like right on the road. And for some folks, that's like, you know, that's the opposite of what you want when you dream of like a country home in the middle of nowhere. And, you know, I kind of actually have that feeling too. I mean, it's nice in the winter when you don't have to plow your driveway all that much. But beyond that, it can be a little bit of a headache. And, you know, the instinct that everybody has is like you look at like more towards the middle of the property, like up on the upper pasture, like at the top of the hill, which just has this incredible, amazing view where you can see like all the way out to Mount Washington, and you can see like just multiple levels of rolling hills and mountains, whether it be, kind of the White Mountains or some of the more local kind of foothills and stuff around here, Bald Mountain, Harvey's Mountain, that sort of thing. It's an amazing, incredible view, but it's only on the top of the pasture. You don't have that view from, like, say, our front porch. And so everybody would probably have this instinct if they had money and say, oh, I'd want to buy that property and make that my home and, build a dream house up on the top of the hill. You can't do that. And the Vermont Land Trust wouldn't let you. And so, again, that becomes a limiting factor for some. But for a guy like me who is dreaming about starting a farm, that was perfect. It actually ensured that this would be essentially an undervalued asset. And we were able to take it over without really, kind of having to take on debt. I mean, we kind of wiped through our entire savings doing it, but, beyond that, it worked out really well. And so that was an advantage that we had that somebody like the farmer who motivated and inspired me didn't have. And so that got me thinking as we started to take this place over of like, well, how do I get to the place where I can have my own farm and I can start things up, and got me doing an inventory of my skills and like, what was I good at and what wasn't I good at? Because of my job and because of my, just general talents and what I've always done since I was a kid between storytelling and being creative and that sort of thing. And also having just a pretty good marketing mind and business sense, that had me thinking about like the business of starting, kind of the farm and like, how do I approach it and how do I use marketing and how do I use content to tell the story and use that to drive the growth of the business. That was an advantage that other folks don't have. And so I was able to use those advantages to build towards my dream. And the guy who inspired and motivated me, this is not how he would have done it, but I think it's kind of funny how that sort of works out where, like, in a place where, and it's funny, like I actually saw him a couple years ago at a conference and was talking a little bit and sort of telling him the story of like, oh yeah, you motivated me and now here's what I'm doing. I'm raising ducks and geese. And he kind of just looked at me funny like, huh? And it's funny how that motivation can shift and evolve as you go on the journey. So coming back to the dogs where I started all of this, right? Like my motivation for how I trained them and how I worked with them was so different and evolved. And as I sit here today and look at where I'm at, I'm actually very happy with where the dogs are and how the dogs are doing. But that was something that took a whole heck of a lot of time. And it was not something that I knew as I started out. And so I come to all of this because the other day I got an email from somebody. And this person, I'm not going to use their name and get too many of their specifics, but like they had two kids. They were working in like a kind of, I call it exurb, suburb type area around a major metro area here in the Northeast. They dreamed of moving out to the country and starting a farm and doing something like we've done. And they were asking for advice on like, what should they do? How can they do it? And the wife, she was actually, she was like a therapist, and the husband, he is, I think, a mechanic of sorts, but like works on like airplanes and stuff. And so they were telling me, like, she was describing all this in the message. And as I was thinking about it, I'm like, well, gosh, you do have some advantages that I don't think we had, and you got to really think about how you take advantage of that. Like, for example, I am completely inept when it comes to mechanical stuff. Like, I was inept of a lot of skills when I first came to the farm. I feel like I've improved some of them, like, for example, my animal husbandry skills, and like, I don't think I'm a good carpenter, but like I can, build the structures that I need to build and do the things that I need to do. And so those were skills I had to really develop. I'm still struggling when it comes to even basic things like changing the oil on the ATV, or, I do when I do the every 10 hours, I lube up my tractor and like hit all the points. And when I do that, like, it takes me probably 5 times as long as most people should do that. And it's like that sort of stuff is like a real liability for me. But like, I thought about this guy who, like, oh no, he's working on like airplanes, like for him to try to fix a tractor or try to, jury rig something, or if he has some like welding skills, like those are all advantages. And so how do you use those skills to kind of build what you want to build? And they were, immediately gravitating towards like, well, how do we get started? And then how do we think about social media, and how do we think of making videos and doing all this stuff? And I kind of felt bad because I sometimes worry when I put stuff out there that, like, because people see this stuff that we do here, and I know I've talked about this in other videos, so I'm not going to harp on it too much, but because they see that, they get motivated and they want to kind of try to do the same thing. I worry because it's not a sustainable or easily repeatable path. It's not to say that it can't be done, or it's not to say that you can't do something similar. I encourage, and I genuinely actually like to help a lot of people do that. Like, as much as I can, for anybody who's particularly making like farming and homesteading content, I'm usually always trying to like help people if they ask for advice or tips on like how to improve their content, or, sharing things that I've learned over the years. Like, that's actually really important to me to give back like that, so that there's other people who can do this too, but not everybody can do it. Not everybody's comfortable sitting on camera. Not everybody's comfortable talking extemporaneously. Not everybody enjoys the tedium of editing or structuring a story or figuring out how do you hook somebody in to make them care. Like, those are all skills that I had that I learned from, my previous work experience that I transported to here. And those were advantages I had. And I just caution for folks who want to try to do the same thing, recognize you can't. And so I say all this as that thought for, when you think about having a dream and you think about pursuing that dream, it is really, really great to have role models. It's really, really great to have inspiration. Like, without that stuff, you will never get to where you need or want to go. But at the same time, if you don't try to modify your approach and modify what your vision ultimately is to match what your skills are and what your situation is, I don't think you're going to be successful, and inherently you're going to struggle and you're going to be unhappy, and it's going to be a very, very difficult path. So the exercise I would encourage anybody to do, and kind of pull out a piece of paper and really get into this one. And I don't know, maybe you, like, if you're driving, pull over, or if you're, watching this on YouTube, I can maybe, I don't know, I'm not going to put a list down, but like, you guys can follow along here and just, write this out and draw it on a piece of paper. And this is the most, dinky, business minded, like consultancy move possible, but I think it's so useful as an exercise, and it's something called a SWOT. It's an acronym. It stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And I strongly encourage everybody, regardless of what you want to do, if you want to start a farm or small business, or you have any other dream or any other thing you're working towards, and you're trying to kind of figure out what do you need to do and how do you need to approach it, I encourage you to do this exercise. I do this exercise every year. Allison and I, like, we'll sit down and talk about these things, because I feel like it's such a good way to honestly look at your situation, and both the challenges that you face as well as the opportunities that exist and upside that's there that a lot of other folks won't have. And so what you do is you take a piece of paper and, break it into like 4 quadrants, just like that. And then, from there, in the upper left-hand corner, you kind of write strengths. The upper right-hand corner, you write weaknesses. In the lower left-hand corner, you write opportunities. And in the lower right-hand corner, you write threats. And so, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. And I actually very much like to do them in this order. Start with your strengths and just rapid fire, whether it's you or you and your partner, or you and some friends or your family, whoever you're dreaming with, do it, or just do it yourself. But it's going to be a little harder actually to do it yourself, but you can do it yourself. But just start rattling off and just writing them down. All your strengths, everything that you think you're good at, everything that you think you do well. Are you, and don't do anything like generic, like, oh, I'm a hard worker, because I think we all like to think that we're a hard worker. And unless you like are absolutely averse to hard work, then you should probably put that as a weakness. I would not list something generic like that as a strength, because you're just going to clutter things up. But focus on the real strengths. Are you a good public speaker? Are you, a good carpenter? Do you have a, strong background in science? Were you a veterinarian? Like what are the things that you're good at? What are your skills? Like what do you do well? And don't say, oh, I don't do anything well. Everybody does something well. Like, I mean, heck, are you really great at playing Minecraft? I don't know. Are you good at building crap on Minecraft? I don't know. Like there's so many different things that you could be good at. Just list those things out that are, real strengths that you have that are not just like generic things like, hey, I'm a hard worker or I'm really passionate, because, I think if you find the right thing, we're all that. Write all those down. Now let's go to the weaknesses. And this is where you got to be brutally honest and deal with the uncomfort of talking about the things you're bad at. Like, for example, I am a total ADHD person, diagnosed. I am horribly disorganized. It's difficult for me to stay on task. It's hard for me to complete projects. I am excellent at focusing and working on things that I care about and like I'm hyper focused on and passionate about. But if I don't care about it, it could like fall to the extreme background of my mind. I mean, let me give you an example. It's always like the little tasks. Like you can actually see a chicken roost right behind me if you're watching the video version of this podcast. And I've been meaning to build that chicken roost for, I don't know, like all summer basically. And I had this plan of actually including a chicken roost inside the hoop coop for the winter. And I was like, oh yeah, I got to do that. But I wasn't passionate about it. I didn't care about it. And so it just like went to the straight up pay no mind list for, 5 months. And then the other day, just as I was getting ready to move birds in here, I'm like, oh crap, I got to build that. And so like I quickly did it. I had the same thing with a fence right outside the hoop coop. Same deal. I was like looking at that fence for 6 months. I mean, I looked at that fence all winter being like, I should have done a better job with it. I looked at that fence all this summer and was like, oh, I need to update that. And it wasn't until the day I was moving birds that I'm like, okay, let me do this. And that's an extreme weakness that I have. And so, I got to be real with dealing with that and addressing that. And so once you have that inventory of all your strengths, and then you have that inventory of all your weaknesses, then start to say, what are the opportunities? And now it's really hard to deal with the opportunities and how do you differentiate an opportunity from a strength. But the way I look at it is the strengths are inside of you and the opportunities are from outside of you. And so, the more you can list out those opportunities and things that you see, like, I have access, like the land cost for the area I want to live in is super, super low, or there are not enough people growing microgreens in my community, or there is a thirst for videos about something. I don't know. I don't want to send people down a video route. But like just, kind of what are those things that are there's like a real need for out there, or there's like a gap or something that people are looking for and you think you could be the one to provide it. Like, get a list of those things. And this is going to be so much harder to do. Like, honestly, when you do this exercise, like sit down and commit an hour to it, like an actual 60-minute hour. Like, don't cheat yourself and be like, okay, I'm done. Like, when you get frustrated, like sit there in a room with a blank piece of paper if you have to, but do not stop until you get past that 60-minute mark. But when you do that, you should be able to get all of your strengths and weaknesses. You might still need to come back to your opportunities, and you might still need to come back to your threats, because the threats, much like the strengths are your internal and the opportunities are your external, the weaknesses are your internal things, the things that you personally are bad at or not good at, and then the threats are really the things that are from outside of you. Like, for example, the real estate market has gone insane, and we've had just massive inflation over the last decade. Job security is really terrible. The place where I'm looking to start a farm is a very, very poor market. The market that I want to, or the niche that I want to write a book about is wicked oversaturated. Like, what are those things that could submarine any plans or dreams that you have? Like, what are those things that are threatening that? And get a real list of that. And like I said, you're going to do that exercise in an hour. You're going to have a list of the opportunities and the threats, go back to it a week later. Maybe talk to some friends, share what you've produced with folks that you feel like won't just crap on your vision, but really genuinely want to help you. Share that with them and see what they think about it. And I think if you can get to that place where you feel good about that, you're going to start to see very clearly, oh, here's what I should do. Because I'll tell you guys, when I did a SWAT back in, let's see, it was after I purchased the farm, but it was before we'd actually figured out how to move up here and live here. But it was like when Allison and I were in that phase of life of like trying to figure out our escape from Washington, D.C. I did another SWAT exercise, and I realized that, well, if I want to try to move to this farm, number one, I'm going to need to figure out a way to keep working. I don't have enough money to just like quit and be a gentleman farmer. That's not going to fly. Allison had already made the plan that she was going to go back to school and become a nurse practitioner, because she had been an RN, she was working in public health, but she needed to go get like another year and a half of schooling and then some licensing to actually be a nurse practitioner and be able to treat patients and prescribe stuff and do procedures, like do all that stuff. She had to just go back to school. And so she had already kind of worked down that path, but I was still trying to figure out, how am I going to work? Like, am I going to find a job in Boston and be constantly commuting back and forth? And I came up with the idea of, well, let me work my, connections and relationships in the industry that I've worked in for nearly 20 years here, and see if I can find somebody who might be looking for somebody to work remote or up in Vermont. And that's actually how I ended up finding the company that I worked for a few years when I first moved up here. Was, basically a friend of mine who I'd worked with at a previous company was already working there. And he's like, oh yeah, you should talk to this guy. He's looking for marketing help and blah, blah, blah. And like, that's how I got my foot in the door. And it was looking at those, opportunities that I had, of the opportunity that, hey, I got a pretty good network and a bunch of relationships here. And so that was one aspect of it. And then as I was saying, well, if I can find a job, what would I do? And I started to say, well, let me start with a basic, simple enterprise, because I've never really worked with livestock. Let me just see if I can handle it. And that's where I was actually, and I've talked about this, actually, I was on his podcast not too long ago talking about this, but I stumbled on this guy down in Texas by the name of Jack Spearco. And he was making these videos on YouTube at the time called the Duck Chronicles, where he was talking about raising ducks and showing what he did to raise ducks and how he has a duck egg selling business. And I was like, oh, that's the perfect business, because if I'm thinking about that job and I'm thinking about doing that business, why don't I, that's something I could actually easily do, where I do chores first thing in the morning and let the ducks do their thing during the day, and I can go off to work, and then at night I can come back and get them all set, and like, it's something that's actually more manageable. And ducks are not nearly as intimidating as, say, giant shaggy horned cattle like the ones I have right now. And so it seemed like a good, safe step into farming versus jumping in with both feet. Versus if I looked at the guy who I was really looking up to, he very much emphasizes kind of focusing on chickens, and that's the way you need to start. Which, I mean, I totally get it, and I actually see a lot of reasons why that makes a lot of sense. But it didn't necessarily make sense to me. And when I looked at my market, everybody around here has chicken eggs and backyard chicken flocks. And so trying to sell chicken eggs was not going to be a viable business venture in any way, shape, or form. But I had a hunch that maybe ducks could, because that was an opportunity. There was a gap in the market. I identified it very specifically in my SWOT. And so that was where it was. Oh, gosh, I might even try to flash up. Oh, yeah, if I have it, I will flash it up right now so you can actually see that SWOT that I originally wrote. But, yeah, that sort of thing was part of what got my approach going. And then the other thing that I recognized was, oh, well, I know how to edit videos, and I know how to use a camera, and I'm, a pretty good storyteller. Let me, in a way to market these duck eggs that I'm going to have, let me start making videos about the ducks and the farm so that, people know who we are on social media, that by the time 6 months in, when I finally have a product to sell, they will have, kind of become familiar with us, and they'll be willing to buy eggs from us. That was the basic premise that got everything going for me. And so that's how I started. And so I tell you all of this because I think you, as you're listening to this or watching this, you're going to have a SWOT that's very different than mine. What you need to do is really look at yourself and your situation specifically and let that be the thing that drives you. The other thing, though, is don't let anything stay like written in stone. Like everything I just described there, right? In 2018, I was going to have a full-time day job, start with the farm, get ducks going, sell duck eggs to be, a business and make that profitable and potentially become, the duck egg magnate of northern New England. Like that was my long-term vision that I had when I kind of built my first plan. And that's not even remotely where I'm at today. Where today, I think if I look at the total number of duck eggs that I sold, particularly given, and I'm not sure if you can hear them, but like the crows that we have and how they've developed this ultimate habit of eating duck eggs. When I look at that number of eggs that I sold this year, I'm going to say, I haven't done my total accounting yet, but it's going to be less than probably 50 dozen duck eggs that I've sold this year, which is significantly lower than in years past. And I will absolutely attribute that to the fact that, I deprioritized it as a business because it's not nearly as profitable and it doesn't make nearly as much sense as a lot of the other things I'm doing, where, things like growing trees and raising cattle and raising geese are very much our core farm businesses. Like when we, and I'll put together a whole video that breaks this down at the end of the year, when we like report out on how much money we made, you'll see that those are the big things that drive this farm, and everything else is kind of just like, I don't know, in the margins and just extra and more or less like bonus or losing propositions. And so, that's something to recognize, that you might start with one business and you need to evolve to another because of that. And I mean, look, to be very transparent too, right? Part of what was our ultimate kind of success driver was, off the back of the videos and content that we create. Like I would not have quit my day job if we weren't making money through like YouTube or this podcast or now with like the book, like that's becoming like another avenue of income. And those are things that I did not set out with a vision to do. And if I was mimicking the farmer that I initially started to mimic, I would have never really ventured down that road. But for me personally, it worked out pretty darn well. And I mean, the exercise I also love to do is say, hey, if I were to win the lottery tomorrow, how would I live my life differently? And the reality always comes back to me. I would still be making this podcast. I have such an inherent need to communicate and share and connect with people and tell stories that I would still be making this podcast. I would still be making videos. Like there's no doubt about it. And I would still be on this farm, working on this farm, because I love that work. I find that work so enriching to my soul, and it just makes me so happy to be taking care of animals and working with animals and taking care of this land and learning new things and struggling and dealing with the challenges. If I didn't have that in my life, I would be ridiculously bored and depressed. And so I think that is something that I consistently look at and say, hey, this is what I would want to do. Hey, Pablo Barncat's coming to visit me. And so I really hope for all of you guys that you can kind of have that too. And when you sit down to do your SWOT at the end of it, also do that lottery question and see what your answers are. And so, yeah, I mean, I say all of this just as a very, very long-winded way. Hey, Pops. Oh, man, Pablo's biting me. I say all of this as a very, very long-winded way to say, don't let comparison be the thief of joy. Don't try to chase your dream when it's actually somebody else's reality. Make your own dream, make your own reality, and make your own plan to getting there. Like those are going to be the things that do it for you. And so to the person who wrote me that email, thank you for writing that email. And I hope this gives you the answer you were looking for, even if it doesn't sound like the answer you were looking for. And if anybody else is listening to this and they're hearing this and they're inspired or motivated and they want to share, I would actually love to do a follow-up episode of this podcast for folks who've kind of gone through this and talk about your plans and dreams. And so if you're interested in participating in something like that, shoot me an email at goldshawfarm@gmail.com, and just put in the subject heading my dream. Like, do it all in caps. It'll make it easier for me. That way I don't lose it in the shuffle of all my chaos of emails, because that is one of my weaknesses. Yeah, I might, like I said, try to build a whole future episode around this. This episode is actually brought to you by Lillian Books. And if you don't know Lillian Books is actually the publishing company I started. And we have already produced our first book, Toby Dog of Goldshaw Farm. It came out in September. There is a paperback version. There is a hardcover version. There is a Kindle, like digital version, and then there is an Audible audiobook version, which I think is the coolest thing. It's basically me narrating with some really talented actors playing the different parts. I strongly encourage you to check it out, and yeah, I will be back very soon with another podcast episode, I guess next week. And so thank you guys for listening, and if you want to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, honestly, that's actually the place where we need the help the most right now. Check out Goldshaw Farm on Apple Podcasts. Even if you're watching on YouTube, like if you could do that and like just write a review on Apple Podcasts, it would be such a solid for us and do some great things for us, and would be wicked appreciated. And I hope I've helped you today, and I'll see you soon.
It's got a soul, this hero farm. It falls asleep inside my arms. We walk the fields under the stars, for love is here, Goldshaw Farms.